So, how we finance nature conservation is rapidly changing, and there are new and innovative finance models being designed and implemented all over the world. I'm excited to talk to Colin and Victoria today about some of the groundbreaking work that they've been doing. Victoria, can you tell us a little bit about UBP and your role as the head of impact?
Sure. Thanks for having me. UBP is a family-owned Swiss bank. We're headquartered in Geneva, although the impact team is based in London. The culture at UBP is really to focus on areas where we can genuinely add value rather than try and do everything. So it's quite entrepreneurial, and I guess this is how the impact franchise came about. We identified that impact was really popular in private markets, so private debt, private equity, but hadn't really translated to listed securities, which is my area of expertise and also that of the team. And so I guess as head of impact, my job really is to focus on the strategy of the impact platform, what makes sense in terms of finding the best ways to kind of achieve our dual mandate. So in listed equity, we're really looking for strong financial returns at the same time as generating non-financial returns. Both of these aspects of performance should be measurable. So that's another area I spend a lot of time on, because measurement of impact is quite challenging in secondary markets. And also I guess one of the better, more fun parts of my role is meeting people like Colin and Peace Parks and trying to find really innovative ways to continue to evolve the franchise.
So, Colin, you head up Peace Parks' Innovative Conservation Finance Division. How did a private bank in Switzerland get involved with Peace Parks Foundation, and what is the nature of the relationship?
It's an interesting question, Lisa. I came across from the commercial side of things, being in private equity and treasury before this. So my background is very much in the financial services space. And having come to Peace Parks and capacitating the new Innovative Conservation Finance Division, my mandate was to look for revenue for Peace Parks, which was not donor funding. So there's a few ways to look at that, but fundamentally there's this groundswell of opinion out there that people need to start thinking about biodiversity and conservation in their daily lives. And we actually came across UBP via one of our London board members. And he introduced me to Victoria. He heard my story and what I was trying to do, and he said, I've got the perfect person. Speak to Victoria. She's head of impact at UBP, and she's trying to do precisely what you're talking about. So we had a few conversations, and it was very iterative, trying to figure out what exactly we could do together. And after a few months of chatting, we got to the point of what we're discussing today, which is the Biodiversity Restoration Fund. And I think that's really where, as you said earlier, this is where the innovation is coming out. This is a fund which is financing ultimately biodiversity outcomes as well as giving commercial returns.
Okay, so Victoria, can you explain to us what does the fund invest in?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, in addition to this fund, we have a couple of broader impact funds, and all three of these funds use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a blueprint to try and find ideas. And this fund, the UBAM Biodiversity Restoration Fund, is a listed equity portfolio. So we invest solely in companies listed on the stock market. It's a global fund, so we take ideas from across the world. We've got a focus on North America and Europe, but also we do have some exposure to emerging markets and and some other developed markets like Australia and Japan. So, I mean, really, the essence of this fund is about finding profitable solutions to a very specific problem. We want to find companies that are really helping make this the sort of disruptive in nature and helping us move away from a very linear kind of extractive economy into a more circular one. So putting capital behind innovative companies. And we actually have a mantra in the impact team, which is regulation, innovation, demand. So we really look for all three of these things to invest in a company, because going back to the point that these are companies that we hope to generate a positive financial return for investors. This isn't a philanthropic exercise. And so we look at regulation. Is there upcoming regulation to support a theme like biodiversity? We would say absolutely there is, you know, from the EU's farm to fork strategy, which is all around reducing pesticide use in the food system, to in the US, there's new legislation around very harmful PFAS chemicals, which involves a massive cleanup exercise, and there are companies which really benefit from that, the water treatment companies, for example, and of course biodiversity benefits from that cleanup and the elimination of those chemicals too. And then in the UK, where I'm sitting now, there's new regulation around residential housing developments, that any planning permission is attached to a commitment to create a 10% biodiversity net gain. So there's a lot of exciting regulation, and we love this as investors because this shows that capital is being spent in this area. So there's a top-down support, but it has to be married with bottom-up demand as well. So do consumers care? You know, are they showing an interest in this? And that really kind of it kind of enhances the profit potential, the opportunity around biodiversity restoration, if that's the case, and we strongly believe it is. And then kind of the jam in the middle of the sandwich is the innovation. So this is where our investments come into play. We're looking for companies that have the innovation to switch us over to this nature-based economy. So think of companies like precision agriculture. This is ag tech, if you will. These are companies that are helping farmers apply much lower amounts of chemical inputs onto the fields. This is a real win-win. The farmers save money, particularly now as fertilizer prices are so high, but also it's a massive benefit for biodiversity, as there's far less runoff into river systems and hedgerows, etc. So companies like that are really innovating a dreadful problem and finding solutions, and we find them across the food system, but also circular economy, and utilities businesses, particularly ones involved with water, coming back to the US PFAS regulations. So it's a real, what we hope to do is invest behind really excitable, profitable solutions, and it's in theory, it's a real win-win, because these businesses should be delivering superior returns because they're solving problems. So there's a biodiversity net gain and hopefully a financial return.
That sounds incredibly exciting. But if I understand correctly, in essence, this is still a commercial fund, right? So how is it different from other funds?
That's a great question, Lisa. Having had these generation discussions between us, it's very clear that biodiversity is very much on the regulatory agenda, as Victoria has described, but not a lot of people understand exactly what biodiversity is, and more specifically, how do you measure it and how do you measure your impact on it. So it was actually Victoria who came up with the idea of this biodiversity committee, which I think uniquely positions the fund. She invited peace parks to participate and Cambridge Conservation Institute. And on that forum of the biodiversity committee, that reports into the investment committee. And fundamentally, we have a mandate between these three parties of UBP, Cambridge Conservation Institute, and Peace Parks to look at the fund with a critical lens focusing on biodiversity. So this is not simply a marketing exercise. This is a fundamentally important component of the fund. And actually, as an example, this morning we had the second sitting of the Biodiversity Committee, and there is a stock in the portfolio which we have to look at and decide whether they are providing the necessary biodiversity gains that the fund is actually designed to invest in. And we have the ability then now to make recommendations that this may not meet the mandate. So there's a real buy-in for that. And where Peace Parks and Cambridge come to the table to some degree is looking at what exactly is biodiversity and how do we measure it. So the chair of the Biodiversity Committee is a man called Tony Juniper, who's the chair of Natural England and a doyen of the ecosystem services and biodiversity space. So through the committee and a lot of hard work done by UBP themselves, we have got to the point of looking at biodiversity from three ways: from the abundance of species, the variety of species, and the connectedness of landscapes. Where Peace Parks comes in here is we have the ability to demonstrate practical biodiversity gains on the ground. So we anticipate over the course of the fund, as it grows, we can go into the field and have scientific rigor applied to biodiversity measurement. So having looked at we call it ABC, the abundance, variety and connectedness, the ABC in a, let's call it a conservation space, does that apply to forestry management companies in the US or water companies in Europe or precision agriculture in Australia? Is there a way that we can start looking at biodiversity globally? And the fund gives a very, very good platform to actually test that across all these corporates. And Peace Parks has the ability to look at it on a very scientific and practical basis. Cambridge comes to the table because obviously they have the academic rigor and they've got the panels of scientists who have the ability to come and give us the ways to look at testing these things. So there's a practical conservation implementation with Peace Parks, an academic partner with Cambridge, and then you have a financial component sitting with the fund. So because the biodiversity regulation is coming forward, you are seeing that certain other financial institutions are raising biodiversity funds, but I believe that we are uniquely positioned in that we're the only ones that have a biodiversity committee with this trifecta of practical implementation, academic and financial components.
I completely echo what Colin said. This is the unique thing here. It's really about this triangulation of expertise, which is hopefully helping all the corporates that we invest in. So the investment part of what we're doing, it's helping move them along a biodiversity curve. So, the on the ground input from Peace Parks, the academic and policy making skills from Cambridge Conservation Initiative, we can use this expertise to talk to our companies that we invest in and really generate positive change, because even companies that are kind of sort of industry leaders with the topic of biodiversity have still got a long way to go in terms of disclosure and reducing their own biodiversity footprint. So all of this is really helpful, and it is, as far as I'm aware, it's unique. As Colin said, this biodiversity committee structure doesn't exist, and typically, not always, but typically financial services can be quite siloed in the way they approach a problem, and actually the multi-stakeholder nature of this is what is so powerful about it, and it's very exciting. And so, how it works in practice is that we have launched a listed equity fund, and we charge a management fee for running that fund and hopefully generating positive returns on that fund. And out of that management fee, we carve out a substantial portion, depending on the share class. It can be around a quarter of the management fee, which goes directly to Peace Parks either peace parks themselves, if the end investor wants to direct it in that way, or to a combination of peace parks and CCI. And it's a genuine partnership, and that's why we are prepared to share the fee in such a way, which is very rare for a sort of UCITS fund to do this. And that's because we have high expectations of our conservation partners, of how they can help us kind of move the needle on the biodiversity debate.
So in sort of layman's terms, does this mean that people can earn money and at the same time conserve nature?
That's right, Lisa. It's exactly that. Someone who wants to invest their money has a choice of where they can invest it, and in this instance, if they put it in the Biodiversity Restoration Fund, they're going to earn a commercial return with commercial benchmarks. But in addition, they have this green wrapper, let's call it, and that green wrapper then funds directly conservation at no cost to themselves. So it really is a very, very innovative structure, and it talks directly to UBP's commitment to the fund, to the biodiversity mandate. And interestingly, so yes, there's a commercial investment, plus you have this green wrapper going to peace parks and going to Cambridge. In addition to the commercial nature of the fund with the green wrapper, there is a special class of shares called the N1 Plus, and an investor who's prepared to sacrifice some of their financial return can do so. So they go through this share class, the N1 Plus, and they will give 1% additional directly to Peace Parks Foundation. And that really talks to a more philanthropic investor view. But fundamentally, this is a commercial fund, and that's what we predict it will be. But there is space for people who are prepared to give away a little bit more.
Have there been a lot of interest to invest in the fund?
Yes, the fund is 6 months old, which is very young for a listed equity fund. Many fund selectors will wait 2 or 3 years to sort of closely examine a fund like this, but we have had a huge amount of interest from across different types of investor, so institutional and private, and also across geographies, from everywhere from Asia through Europe to, specifically the Nordics. The Nordic countries have been very interested, and it's generated a huge amount of energy, and I think that's partly timing. I think the world has been focused on climate change and the race to net zero for the last sort of 5 to 10 years, certainly with an amplification of that in the last couple of years. And I think increasingly people are beginning to realise that net zero is very important, but it has to come alongside nature positive, that climate change and biodiversity are absolutely inextricably linked, and we just can't solve one without the other.
And what class of investors are you guys looking to attract?
So Lisa, I think this is really the key thing here, is this is available to normal investors. You don't have to be a super billionaire to now affect conservation. You can invest in a fund and have a passive donation to conservation. And it's quite interesting because if you were a corporate and on your balance sheet you've got cash and some of it's invested, you can choose to allocate that in various funds. But if you just place that cash, which in this fund, which is very liquid, you will passively be funding a conservation outcome and a biodiversity outcome. So it's a combination of retail investors, anyone who wants to invest, corporates who want to place some cash, institutions who would like to get their portfolio right. But there's also this ability to create a instrument for people who typically aren't able to go and create donations with their capital, to do so on a passive basis. And that's really being funded out of the management fee. So the UBP is giving up a piece of their management fee in order to effect this change. So it's just about getting the word out, because I think this is something that is reasonably easy to do, and it is simply a financial decision which makes financial sense. But you have this additionality of having a biodiversity impact directly funding conservation, which is quite unique, and I think it really hits the brief of trying to move away from donation-funded conservation and utilizing the financial markets to fund conservation, because ultimately that is what the financial markets depend on.
Oh, this is massively exciting, really, really exciting stuff. What's next? How are you guys moving forward?
Sure. What's next, Victoria? I think it's a matter of speaking to the right people and getting some buy-in. We've created the structure, which it demonstrates a commitment from UBP and commitment from Peaceparks. We need people, investors, to come to the fund, have a look at it, kick the tires, understand that this is a very good financial decision, and place their money there, and they will be creating change from their living room.
I hope you've got an open diary, because I think you guys are going to get a lot of requests. How can people reach you?
People can reach me directly through, you can email me at victoria.leggett@ubp.com. And you can also go onto our website, the UBP website, and take a look at the impact platform pages. We really have a commitment to transparency. So the minutes of a lot of our meetings are published there, and there's quite a lot of case studies and other video footage if you'd like to get to know more about the franchise.
And same for me. Just give me an email, give me a phone call. Very happy to explain and discuss. And I'll send you the financial brain, Victoria. She's the one who is the wizard. I'll just be the postman.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been one of those conversations that leaves me feeling very hopeful for our future, because you guys are ticking a lot of the boxes that conservation is struggling with. Financing being one of the obvious problems that we've had for a very, very long time, and the view of conservation being this pit where you just throw your money in, and you hope that climate change will hopefully be slowed down. But I mean, this is exciting. This gives me hope. Thank you so much for the work that you've put in. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and I think you need to quickly finish your to-do list, because you guys are going to be very, very busy.
Thank you, Lésa. Much appreciated. Victoria, thank you. Great to chat again.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Lésa.